Mobile 4 gaming community and Beyblade community as a whole. We're back again. It's kind of like back-to-back episodes. Have a very special guest today, TSO, and we'll get to introducing the Supreme One. She'll introduce herself. Actually, I don't have really any announcements today. I guess we just go ahead and just kick this right off. So first and foremost, thank you, TSO, for joining us on the show today. We have a couple of topics to go over. I know y'all had a Beyblade tournament as well today. Mike is also on the scene. So without further ado, oh, my bad, Mike cut you off. Without further ado, you want to go ahead and say hey, TSO, and introduce yourself?
Yeah, cool. Hey guys, I'm TSO, technically the Supreme One, but I don't feel like most people go by that at this point. Um, yeah, I'm not sure where to start because I don't want to cover any of the topics that we have planned. But I'm currently active in the Maryland area, going to tournaments in Maryland, sometimes Virginia, Pennsylvania, sometimes even New York. I've been in the community for about 11 years now and primarily enjoy Metal Fight, Burst Classic, but I really play pretty much every format at this point.
Yeah, solid. I know you've been with the community for a very, very, very long time. Been playing for a very, very long time. That's why I was really happy and excited to get you up here because Mike and I, we don't know as much. Well, we know about the older generations, but not as far as like competitive play and that. And I want to get you up here to get some enlightenment on that. We talked to Geester, but I think you're more involved as far as with classic or metal fight and things like that. So to kick off some of that knowledge to us. But before into that, like what got you into Beyblade in general?
Yeah, so I actually got into Beyblade a little bit older in life. I didn't discover plastics or HMS. I got into Metal Fight, like I said, about 11 years ago. And at that point, I was in high school. It was a summer spending with my grandparents, and I did not have much internet access, and I'd just gotten into anime. So, kind of watching any anime that I could, and came across the Beyblade anime. Definitely not the best, but I think
Yeah.
Metal Masters was airing at the time, and just so that I could fill out my anime list profile, I watched the show, and I kind of had this moment where I was like, I wonder if this is like Pokemon, where it's like there's a competitive community. Never really got into Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But just out of curiosity, discovered the WBO. At the time, I was pretty active on some other forums. So it kind of became second nature for me, just posting on the forums. And then fortunately for me, a few other members of the community and I kind of were able to band together and host the first tournament in Connecticut.
Oh,
So I think at that point, yeah, like I said, I was in high school. We would host really, I think zero G standard limited came out a couple years into me playing competitively, and really from day one in the Connecticut community, I was there, and then moved a couple, about a year or so into that, down to Florida. Unfortunately, not very active at the time, even though I tried to make it active.
uh,
And yeah, so I took a break for a few years. That was around when Burst came out.
okay.
So yeah, I got into Metal Fight like kind of towards the end. I think Zero G had just started being released as products,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a great time I think to get into Beyblade because at the time, I mean, tournaments were certainly smaller than they are now, and we can talk about all the similarities and differences uh, at a later point. But it was kind of at that point where releases were starting to slow down, and at the time, the community on the WBO forum really documented everything there was to know about competitive. So as long as you had the time to really commit to reading and you know contributing to the community with testing, all of that was available on the forums. And so I just dedicated a lot of time to reading up, buying all the releases that people saw as competitive, And fortunately for me, there weren't too many new releases to buy, which was good because, being a high schooler and my parents weren't exactly supporting me with my hobbies at that point.
Yeah.
Um, I was still able to kind of maintain a pulse on what was going on.
Oh, that's dope. So you bounced around a lot, like pretty much all over the East Coast. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Actually, like I said, I took a break for a few years. Part of that definitely due to being down in Florida. I did host a couple tournaments down there. There was one at Anime Festival Orlando in 2016, but that
mhm.
was Metal Fight. And I remember uh, Scott and some others being like, "Why are you hosting Metal Fight? Like, you should be hosting Burst." And I'm like, "Want to?" At
Well,
the
that's what
time,
you
like
love.
Burst.
You love Metal Fight, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately at the time Burst was rough. I think a lot of Metal Fight players really fell off in early Burst. Some of them did come back like Geetzer and a few others, but really, people were just very disappointed by the way that the series was handled very early on. There were nearly all of the competitive releases with single and dual layers. The teeth would wear if it wasn't immediately obvious, like, the case of Valkyrie, where it's an incredibly competitive single layer, but within
Mhm.
10 battles, the teeth are worn and it's unusable. But even things like Death Scyther and Odin, the teeth will wear over time. And people were just very, very disappointed by that, by the fact that the meta was purely stamina because there just wasn't with that amount of weight, there just wasn't the attack power and your attack types were still bursting, so it was very risky. So I think I was kind of turned off, and then what actually got me back into it was I think it was during the God era when I was on study abroad in college, and I went to the UK, went to a tournament in London, and there it was a really good time for the meta because it was right before Spriggan Requiem had been released, and as you might know, or maybe it was definitely a little before I think you guys' times.
Yeah.
But Friggin' Requiem was I think the reason we prevented dual changing modes because for a while you were allowed to dual spin change, and it was even after that, even after we banned the dual spin change, I believe we still banned Friggin' Requiem because it was just so overpowering. So this was like a couple months, maybe a month or two before that came out. And
Mhm.
Siege Excalibur was really dominating in a really fun kind of way. It was really awesome. I think I have some battles on my YouTube, and it was great to see the community, to see players of all ages, and to see that there actually was some balance at the time. That's what got me into hosting in Richmond before I moved up to Maryland.
Oh man, that's dope. That's dope. That's a interesting story. I didn't know. So was the ban as far as Spring and Requiem, was that in general standard, or was it like limited or classic, or was it just normal
I think
burst?
I think at the time that was the only standard, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was, yeah, it was standard because at the time we didn't have classic, we didn't have limited. Um, I think classic came out, I want to say like 2018 maybe. Um, so, it was that was the meta. The meta was very much like Garuda G3 when that came out because it was just such an upgrade over Maximum Garuda, and Maximum Garuda was competitive. It just bursted easily.
Hmm.
So that Spriggan Requiem, and then sometimes, usually, I think you'd see like maybe like a Siege Excalibur or a Twin Nemesis, but really those two were just dominating in such a powerful way. And um, frankly, I think having those and having a pulse on what was competitive and what made sense at the time definitely helped me propel in the rankings pretty early on.
That's solid. That's what's up. So, um, I wanted to ask when you were in Florida, because I know you said at the time it wasn't they didn't really have a competitive scene. Do you know Joy? I think it's Joyos or Hoyos.
Oh yeah, Joyous. So he actually, well, I think started up the community after I'd left.
Oh, okay.
At the time when I was there, it was, I moved down there, but I would still, because I had family up in Connecticut, attend tournaments in Connecticut in 2014, 2015.
Hmm.
Um, I tried to host like a couple club tournaments in like 2016 in Jacksonville, Florida. But I think Joyo started at the scene shortly after that, and it was just quite a ways away, I want to say.
Yeah.
Being in Jacksonville, you're like on the border of Georgia, so it was kind of hard to get down there to do anything when I was back visiting family.
Solid. Yeah, because I know the Florida scene had kicked up with him because that's just from my conversations with CSC Raymond and his dad. I know Joyos had got them involved with it. I didn't know that there was a scene before then. I didn't know that you were down there. So that's some good history.
Yeah. Actually, like I think very early on when he started hosting, and a little bit before that, Brisk Aquario was hosting in that area. So I would say Brisk Aquario really started the scene up. And we attended a tournament together, the one that I hosted in Orlando. But unfortunately, I think part of my inability to really get a scene started up was just being in Jacksonville. I think Orlando and Miami and you know those parts of Florida have definitely had more success, just being more of an urban area.
Okay.
So from the start, you've just been a competitive player. Like you just have a
Yeah,
competitive mindset.
yeah. I think I'm a pretty competitive person. I think for me, um, what drew me to the WBO was sort of the forum community because at the time, like I said, I was pretty active on a few different forums, and because I was spending a good amount of time on the forums reading up on competitive knowledge. Really, from the first tournament I attended, I came in kind of knowing what to do. Um, I placed third in that one, and I think in hindsight, I mean the combos that I used, I think were pretty competitive, and I think part of it was some bad luck, and also the fact that I didn't even have a BB10 at the time, so I had like the Sonokong Wide Square Stadium, which is absolutely not equivalent. That was the only stadium that I had. So, trying to test in that, everything's going to be a little different.
Hmm.
Right.
Hmm. So, I guess to hop on to the next topic, because you've been competing so long, and like I said, feel free to discuss and talk because I feel like I'm just in a history lesson right now and just learning mode. So, walk us through, I guess, from the metal fight generations, all the way through, I guess, Burst, as you remember it, because you hinted on it a little bit before, just like in the beginning of Burst and how it killed the community. Because I know there's a lot of metal fight players, like even now, that just don't enjoy Burst. Even when I'm at some of the conventions, they ask like about metal fight because I guess they just love it, and maybe it's just because the older generation. I know the little kids like Burst, but that's all they know. So what were
Yeah.
those transitions like, and some of the things you've seen from um, single layer, God series, Chose GT, and all?
Yeah, I think there are a couple different directions I could take that. One would be kind of the differences and sort of the pros of being a part of the forum community and the competitive scene back then. And then I
Mhm.
think on the other hand, there's a completely different and equally valid conversation to be had about sort of the differences in the two systems themselves. So, what would be more of interest to you, like sort of the differences between those forum dynamics, or I guess the systems themselves.
Um, and the farm dynamics, you mean in the sense of the WBO?
Yeah.
Yeah,
WBO history or Beyblade system history.
let's do Beyblade system history as well
Yeah,
as some of the competition because I think later on I want to get to the forums and we could possibly tie that in as well as the culture because I do want to talk about that, but um,
absolutely. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Glad I clarified. So I think first of all, I would say being in Connecticut, I think with every scene, there's definitely a learning curve with the community. And one of the challenges that we had was there only being a few really dedicated, serious older players. That did mean though that because there weren't that many kids or there weren't that many players in general. There would be a few kids, but like we'd have trouble getting like even 8 players. But when we did, there were a few of us that were serious. That said, I think being in Connecticut, like the meta was very stamina focused with Metal Fight Standard early on. So it's very interesting to see kind of looking back now at the meta in different regions and seeing how it was completely different. I think I come with a very specific perspective, and it's always kind of interesting to see like what other people were using at the
Mhm.
time back then. Um, but yeah, I think that's one observation I have. I think as far as kind of the early burst releases go, I know I hit on a little bit sort of the focus on stamina with the
Yeah,
meta. The part where um, I'm trying to think.
I know you
Uh,
said that the initial burst they had a lot of problems with wear and tear, and they didn't have the attackers weren't like really attackers and stuff.
yeah, I think there just wasn't really enough weight on them. They're not having any metal. Really, like classic wouldn't be a good format if it weren't for the dash drivers,
Mhm.
because those were what really. I mean, and also like I don't think there was a rubber. I'm pretty sure there wasn't a rubber driver until Excalibur, and that was not
Yeah,
that far down the road, but
far
it
enough.
the meta had already been established. We'd already gotten several releases, and tournaments were being had before we even had a rubber driver.
Mhm.
So
Was that
that's one factor. But I think what kind of makes Classic very balanced is that it actually brings a lot of layers to the forefront that were never competitive in the early days of Burst, and that never would have been competitive because their teeth were too weak. I think like honestly, Odin and Death Scyther, definitely Dark's Death Scyther had stronger teeth in some of these attack layers. So without the dash drivers, they just really had no chance. And then I think as we started to get some metal on some releases, I mean, I mentioned Siege Excalibur. That's definitely a big one because that release had like a decent amount of metal on it compared to everything else at the time, and that's part of what that and Legend Spriggan were really like two of the really good attackers because they had like a tiny bit of metal. At the time, that was pretty rare to see. Honestly, Legend Spriggan was kind of fun because there was a very brief period of time where that was good, and it was back when you could change spin direction. So it was like actually having an attack layer that could change spin directions. And that was actually kind of viable, was interesting. But I think just the speed at which releases were coming out and how quickly it turned into a dual spin direction meta was what kind of made there be only very brief glimpses at like a perfectly balanced meta with burst standard. What was burst standard at the time?
Mhm. I
I think one of the oh sorry, what were you gonna say?
no, you good. Wait, Michael, you about to say something?
I was just gonna say, wasn't it Excalibur with the rubber tip came out there and the dual layer? But
Yes. I
yeah,
want an Excalibur was single layer. There was Xeno Excalibur. Xeno Excalibur might no Excalibur had Extreme on it, I believe.
was it regular Excalibur?
I know that
I
the
thought all
WBBA released it.
I thought all of the like pre like the single layer, I thought all of those were like plastic tipped, and then there was when dual
No,
layer came
so
out.
the original Excalibur was Excalibur Force Extreme, and then the dual layer Excalibur was Xeno Excalibur with Impact. So, but to to your point, I think there was really only one single layer that had a
Right,
rubber tip.
right.
Mhm. Um, what was that? So I was just gonna interrupt for a second. The format, the only format then was it only single bay format, single bay, and was deck even
Yeah.
back then?
I want to say Deck came out around 2016. It was early burst,
Oh,
and yeah, I want to say that Brad was a big part of that because Brad did come back briefly during the early years of Burst. And I think there was definitely an adjustment period where many of us had to get used to deck format.
mhm.
Overall, I think it's looking back, absolutely just a positive to have it. But I think we were so used to just doing round robin, and then I tell this to people sometimes, and they're always like, "What? That's crazy." We because the tournaments were so small, I mean,
Hmm.
especially in Connecticut, we would always do round robin or group round robin. We also didn't have really guidelines. There was no like, oh, you do Swiss at this side, like size. You would just kind of run what you wanted sometimes.
Okay.
Um, yeah. So you do round robin, and then if you had a tiebreaker, you do another round robin because we wouldn't go off of Buchholz or anything like that. It would just be purely based off of your win record. And then you'd go to finals and you do single bay round robin. So yeah, it was interesting. I surprisingly looking back, I think because I didn't really know what else there was out there. I think if I knew that Swiss existed and that all these other things could happen, I'd probably have hated it. But I think it was just we were all so used to it because that's what it was. There wasn't there we didn't know what we didn't know.
So
But yeah,
even if
that's how Metal Fight was all throughout the years.
just so even if so the whole ruling, well, I don't want to just jump into the culture of the WBO, but the whole ruling for like Swiss and round robin, because I know now it's like, well, if you have 8 players, you're doing just one block of round robin, 16 players, 2 blocks. At that time it was just y'all
Yeah.
just round robin, and that
There
was
well
just
there were some guidelines. I think um it was I think part of it was the fact that we just never really had enough players to do Swiss. And I do remember the first tournament that we hosted with Nigel Ack hosting, and I think me and Leo 19 were judges. He just ran, we had like 22 players, and he just ran round robin.
whew,
And I think he was either supposed to run block round robin or Swiss. Yeah, it was, and we
yeah,
didn't realize it until later. We were still able to get it processed, but it was crazy. Um, yeah, I think there were. I'm sure if you compared the organizer's guide now to back then, it would be a lot longer now. There
yeah.
were also just way fewer rules specifications. I think there was, and well, this will go into culture, so I'll kind of hold
It's
off
all good.
on
It's all good.
elaborating on that for now.
Um, yeah, well, it was still it. I think just thinking about it is just trial and error, and going through that, which I went through, is how we have what we have now, um, with the more, I guess, clarified rulings. Like we still complain about stuff, but in comparison to like what y'all had to do back in the day, I don't know, it makes me appreciate
Yeah,
more what's going on. Um,
there are a lot more specifications, I think, about if this happens, here's what you do, and all of those were compounded from
Trial and error.
incidents where there just wasn't a guideline for what to do in a certain situation, or we had to make the rules up as we went. And I was on and off a part of that rulemaking process.
yeah,
So we have you to thank for everything.
yeah,
Well, I don't know about that, but
yeah.
I've definitely bopped back and forth to different sides of the field, whether I was helping make rules or experiencing them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I know I asked from each generation to walk us through, but did you play that much with Chozy and GT and the Sparking, or were you just heavily involved?
Yeah, I did. I don't think I've really dwelled on it very much, but actually, God and Shozi were really where I came up in the Bay rank. I think Chozi was a really interesting time where there, I think, unlike now, it feels like there there are so many more parts and so many more, and there's so much mold variation and burst that there's a lot that's unpredictable, and outcomes that you expect aren't always what happens. I think during Chozi that it was a really interesting time because there was a very clear cut this part attached to this layer and this driver will always beat this layer and this driver. Whereas I think now, you ask people and they'll be like, oh, I think wind bearing drift is better. I think I think Dynamite, F Gear, Bearing, and it truly depends on your mold in some cases. Back then, it was very much like rock, paper, scissors, but a really interesting and complex like rock, paper, scissors with Archer Hercules on Eternal, Hell Salamander on Bearing, and I think later on it was Perfect Phoenix on Atomic, then later Perfect Phoenix on Extend Plus when that came out. But before that, sometimes you'd have some combination of something, or you just get like a twin nemesis, or even a Seek Excalibur. Even then,
Yeah. Was that one of your? So that was like your favorite burst generation, or was it GT or?
I think I definitely have a little bit of a soft spot for that period of time with the Cho-Z and GT. Sparking, it was just so short. I think I did kind of fall off there because at the time I was graduating from college and moving, and it was
COVID.
definitely like a transitory period for me. And I know that that's kind of when Crisis Crusher came onto the scene.
Mhm.
But we ran a ton of tournaments in Shozi and GT, and it really did feel like uh, it was. I mean, it was definitely a stamina meta. I don't think I would have told you I enjoyed it more than Metal Fight, but I definitely did enjoy attending those tournaments and kind of the way that things played out. It it was just very predictable, and I think it was very rewarding to people who spent the time testing things, because you'd go into a matchup knowing if I use this, I'm going to beat this, and then there was that element of counterplay, and I think that's what as much as I like pick three, choose one, and I think 3v3 is interesting. 1v1 is I really like it, and I think I've realized that I like it more kind of now that I have other formats to compare it to. Again, like this, that was the only thing we had at the time, but it definitely rewards people who are always there in their community, who kind of get a sense of what other people are using and who are able to counter pick them
Okay,
pretty well.
that's dope. That's dope. I heard you, Mike. You said COVID, and I think we don't think about that a lot. That really killed sparking, because the whole
Yeah.
time that was out, it was like, I mean, that whole year we weren't really allowed to have tournaments. It wasn't just a WBO thing. I mean, our local community, we couldn't gather in groups of 10 or more, I think, even in public areas for a little while in my city. So it
Hmm.
was very hard for a lot of us. Tempest Solomon was definitely a thing. So the sparking, it was there, but it was kind of like a little blip in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely wasn't like there were some interesting matchups. There were some interesting like counters to the meta that came out during that time, but that's a great point, Mike. Like I completely forgot about that. Honestly, it's crazy to
Yeah.
say. Like looking back, I'm like, oh wow, that was kind of the reason why I didn't have as many sparking releases, because I was kind of able to take a break for a bit because we weren't hosting tournaments.
Yeah, we were forced to take a break. Everyone was like, yeah.
Probably good for my wallet.
Yeah, yeah. And then I guess jumping into the DB generation, like how was that? The current meta or the current system? How'd you like it?
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel pretty disengaged, surprisingly. I definitely attend a lot of tournaments, but I think there's just it feels a lot more difficult to predict and prepare for things, because like I mentioned before, everything is so mold dependent, and it feels like everyone, it's even if we ran 1v1, there would be much less counterpicking, because there's less of an identity tied to what each person is using, I think.
I,
Whereas, earlier on, it'd say, oh, this person's going to choose attack, or this person really likes this driver or this layer. I think um, in general with the dynamite system and burst, it feels like it's the meta just isn't diverse enough for that.
Yeah.
So I hate to be a downer on it.
No, it's all good. Yeah.
I've definitely spent a lot of time playing and balance tuning, but I think I do feel a little bit less engaged with tournaments and with the competitive scene right now than I did even during Sparking, but certainly during GT and Chosy.
Okay.
I was gonna say too, like right now in Dynamite Battle, balance tuning is probably a lot more important than it was in the earlier systems.
You didn't need to balance tune in the earlier systems, really.
Yeah.
You need to make sure that you didn't have something that was off balance, but you didn't need to make sure that you had something that was perfectly balanced. And part of that, I think part of that was due to the meta diversity, because you weren't always going up against the exact same Beyblade as you.
Right.
But part of it was also, as I alluded to earlier, just the very clear cut matchups. I could have a not perfectly balanced Archer Hercules on Eternal, and it's still going to beat Perfect Phoenix on Atomic, and
Right.
that's just how it is.
You know what?
Um,
Let's sure. I'll take the blame for it. I started doing it a lot more than I think most others, and then people just kind of got forced into doing it because I was doing it.
yeah, and I think that's part of it. I think part of it is just the fact that right now you're expecting to go up against multiple people that may have the exact same combo as you, and there's nothing outside of molds. There's nothing that, and well, okay, so I guess it's molds, launch strength, and balance tuning, and those are the factors that go into it. But at the end of the day, I think molds and balance tuning are going to make the biggest difference between whether you win or lose.
I can agree.
Solid, solid. I'm very curious. I want to hear about the culture, but first I want to knock out, and it's just some of the history with or not even the history. I never played Classic. I don't understand. You talked about most of it. What are some of the bands in Classic? Like, what is the Classic format? I guess for if I'm a complete dummy coming into the WBO, and what's the difference in that in between bursts? Like, I know you have some bands. What generations can I use? What makes the meta, or what makes it fun?
Yeah, so I think those are all great questions. I think it's very straightforward right now because I was part of the initial conversation with creating Burst Classic, and we had this initial rush to like be like, all right, let's put everything that's like viable at this power level, and then we scaled it back a little bit. And what we ultimately landed on is you're using forge discs with one letter. You're using single and dual layers except for Lost Longinus.
Mhm.
Um, there are a few exceptions with some of the Hasbro exclusives, but that aside, you are able to use almost all drivers. And what that creates is and I'm going to speak to this from the perspective of someone who has not been scarred by Dragoon, because that's a whole nother story. So assuming that gets banned, and that's another topic. What I think brings a lot of people to Classic is the fact that it's a single spin meta where you unlock by being a single spin meta, you unlock countless driver matchups that would otherwise be completely non-viable in any other format. Things like liner are incredibly competitive for stamina. You have a lot of driver stamina driver matchups variation,
Mhm.
and attack is also really in the okay. And again, speaking from the perspective of Dragoon, which being banned,
Yeah.
excluding Dragoon, attack is extremely viable. Probably the most viable it is in any format. And you'll see players use completely different layers, different setups, and find equal success. It's very much reliant on your skill. There's so much diversity in terms of what you can use and what's viable that there's a very unique identity that each person who plays Classic competitively has. And I can tell you that the things that I've won tournaments with in the past are things that other people don't want to use or have never considered using, because it's just a little bit different. The other really interesting piece of it is that I would personally say, and I'm speaking from, I think, kind of a unique experience in that I've acquired most, if not all, Hasbro and TT parts for Burst Classic. And I
Dang.
would say that they, Hasbro and TT, are both equally viable. And you can choose to collect one or both. You don't need to collect both. But if you do, you unlock so many different parts and so many different combinations. Um, yeah, it's really interesting, I'd say. And I think KOs are still 2 points. Bursts are 2 points. So
I think Burst is 1
your
point
deck.
classic.
You said what?
Sorry, I'm thinking about deck format.
Yeah.
In deck, it's bursts are 2 points, KOs are 2 points. So it's a very fast paced finals. And
Mhm.
I think another thing that you see with the other burst formats is that the reason I typically don't choose to replay in other burst formats is because if I just lost to something, it's highly unlikely that I'm going to be able to get the 2 points I need to come back. I'd rather someone select a bay and then I counterpick them directly. In Burst Classic, because bursts are very common and KOs are pretty common, both are 2 points. Replays are a lot more common, and it's the one format that I would say I will do replays in, because if I lose by outspin with a KO attacker, I can go from being in a losing position to being in a winning position and having the advantage by just 1 point by doing a replay, and that's not something that you're going to get in Burst Standard.
Well, see, that's one thing too. Burst Standard right now, like I'm still an advocate of. I think we need the wall bounce and the KOs to be 2 points, because
Mm-hmm.
I really think that just brings more strategy to like deck format, where you can use
I
the
think, yeah,
attacker.
I agree. I
Yeah,
think if
like
KOs were 2 points, I would use attackers.
yeah,
I think Burst Standard is kind of interesting right now. I think we had a tournament today, which Mike swept in single-handedly, which is pretty awesome. So props
Yeah.
to you, man. But I think if I had made finals, one thing I wanted to try was using metal bearing drift, and a pure defense type. And I don't think I need an attacker, because if I know that I'm not going to burst, the worst that can happen is I get KO'd. It's the same as getting outspun, right? And
Yeah.
then I can pick my defense type. I know I'm never going to get burst. I could get KO'd, and then my opponent gets. I lose the point. I get to counterpick. It's all about that first point in Burst Standard finals.
ooh, it's weird because today, I mean, you were already gone.
Yeah,
I
unfortunately.
lost the first point to JC, and then still ended up coming back with a score of 5-2.
Did you guys replay, and did you have attack versus attack matchups?
We did not have attack versus attack. He replayed a couple of the matches where I won.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah,
it
I
was
see.
yeah.
I think sometimes replaying in Burst Standard can
I never
be to
replay.
your detriment, to the point. Yeah, exactly. I would I mean I can't say because I didn't see it, but I would go so far as to say that sometimes that can be the reason for losing when you win the first point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That that
It,
that tactic or that strategy or my bad. Go ahead, Mike.
no, I was just gonna say it's definitely something like I don't think in like I think TSO is probably right in like only maybe Burst Classic or repeats fine. I think in just about any other format, if you're replaying, you're doing it wrong, unless like the only exception I can give is if like you're playing an attacker and you messed up the launch and you just like self KO'd. I could see you then saying a replay.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I
like
guess
you were
even then though, you can always choose your attacker. I think
right.
I guess if your deck is if your deck has multiple holes and you know that they could choose something else that you wouldn't have as good of a chance against, I think that's absolutely fair. But I think all other things considered, you assume that you're going into a match where you and your opponent's decks are mostly evenly matched. And in that case,
Yeah.
if they switch into something else, you've probably got a stamina type that can more directly counter it, or they'll stick and then you just use the same attacker.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do a lot of my a lot of my playstyle is basing things off of the fact that I'm pretty sure, like, with the winning combos list, like, people see my winning combos a lot. So they're probably like, okay, well, I'm just going to play what he's playing. And so I expect the mirror matches a lot. But
Yeah, you just kind of know that you can play into it better, especially
yeah,
if you're balance tuning.
right. Like, I just had that mindset of, okay, even if they're playing the same thing, I can probably outplay them.
I think
Just
that's kind of where I was at with Cho-Z, with that meta I was talking about with the Archer Hercules, Hell Salamander, Perfect Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
All Many people did use the same parts, and oftentimes I would go up against the same deck, but not everyone knows how to play into everything. Not everyone knows kind of what launch you need to use, or you know what they might be using the deck, but they don't know why they're using specific things.
right.
And so I do think that kind of having that intuitive understanding can help. I think the last thing I'll say on that replay piece is if you lose the point in replay and burst standard, you're still down even if you win the next even if you win that point. You would need 2 points in order to actually be up, because at that point they're countering you in the following pick.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
100%.
I was saying, in regards to that, like the tactics and strategies, because I try to help out a lot of the new kids, and I go over it within our local community here in NC, and I tell them this when we're playing, because we only play standard, and I try to give them like just some tips, especially if it's their first time or this and that, to make a general announcement. That it's always better to say switch, um, because in some cases too, it's a mind game, and someone may switch to something that is a mistake, and at that point, if they switch to something
Right.
mistake,
I,
Absolutely. I think that's definitely another factor that I've I've been able to take advantage of in the past, is someone not entirely knowing my deck or their deck, or I mean, again, definitely more so I think when those type matchups were much more prevalent and I was able to look at their deck and say, okay, I've tested this so many times. I know that this is always going to beat that, but they don't know that.
yeah,
Um, yeah.
yeah. That's like, and I don't know. I don't know if this is gonna sound like arrogant or anything, but there are times where, like, I'll watch other people's YouTube things of their matchups in deck format, and I'll see like someone using a combo that I know I use against something like random, and the random thing would win. And in my head, I'm like, why didn't this guy go to high mode like he should have? Like,
yeah,
Hmm.
and like, I don't know if that's just like me being arrogant, or the fact that it's just like I know I've played this kind of stuff enough to where I know they made the mistake. They should have done something else.
Well, I think that comes in because when I first started playing and I was playing deck, a lot of times, and I was the one, I didn't understand the switching, and I didn't understand all the combos. I was getting into Beyblade or getting new and used to it, and even after a couple of times I played, it took a good little while for me to really understand how deck format works, and to be able to counter someone and to look at their combos and to know what I need to play against specific combos. Um, because in North Carolina, at least back when we started, everyone wasn't just playing the same thing. Like people did have their own specific decks. So
Hmm.
we had started, I at that time I could have taken more advantage of building more counters, but I didn't have the knowledge. But now a lot of people are playing the same thing, and even still now I can do the counters, but sometimes you don't know, because I would finish my match, and this is when Frost was hosting, and he was like, "Yeah, giving me tips like you probably should have used this and that," and I learned later on, and sometimes that's what it is. They'll have the YouTube channel to record the decks, or record the matches, and they may not know. I've even dealt with that, and I don't say anything during the match like lately now, and I'll play somebody in deck, and I'm thinking like, hey, if they use this combo, like I have nothing to beat that. I've seen someone, they've had a combo that literally swept my whole deck, and will be like 4-4, and I'll say switch, um, and then they switch their combo, and I had nothing to beat the combo that they had, but they'll switch it, and I'll be like, okay, and then I just get the
Yeah.
win. So that I think that's what it is. It's like learning curves, but the more we play, the more we learn. Because those same kids that made those mistakes, they'll come back and they won't make them again. Kids and adults, and that's part of the growth of it and the fun in it.
Yeah, definitely a little bit of poker there with
Yeah.
and I'm kind of bad at that because I'm a very like expressive person.
No poker face.
Especially, in finals when it's a little bit more cerebral, I tend to like want to talk through things, and I've had to hold myself back because sometimes that information that I'm sharing can mean the difference between them picking the combo that I'm very afraid of and them choosing something that I can more certainly beat.
Very
Yeah.
true. The next one before we get into the community, I guess Metal Fight, like same thing, explaining it, because that's something neither one of us have really played, and I don't know Mike's knowledge on it, but I know mine is very limited. I just started actually even playing with the Beyblades at our last convention, the Metal Fight ones, and I had a lot of fun. You went over it a little bit, but how, as far as that meta, that gameplay, like what is the enjoyment there or excitement you have within that system?
Yeah, so I'd say, I mean, I think the best way to get someone into Metal Fight is just to play it with them because what I've seen with a lot of the kids that got into Burst and attended Burst tournaments is that once they play Metal Fight, oftentimes, I'd literally say more often than not, the kids that I've talked to that started with Burst that have played Metal Fight prefer Metal Fight.
Mhm.
It's just it. I think as even though the battles are longer, they're higher octane. It's metal hitting metal. I think there are a lot of pros to getting into Metal Fight in versus Burst. I think part of it is certainly wear because you're not using plastic part. It's not plastic making contact with plastic. Your parts are going to hold up a lot longer. Things. Of course, as things wear over time, the plastic will definitely get brittle and break. But Metal Fight has held up a lot better than I expect Burst will with the coming generation. Just because so much more of it is metal, more of it is a little bit more durable. You like my entire competitive collection I've been using for over 10 years.
Oh,
And I think one of the signature things about Metal Fight that's a really big selling point for a lot of people is going to be the height matchups. It adds a level of complexity and a level of uh, competitive play that unfortunately we really haven't seen in Burst because the height variation it's there, but it's not there to the point where it makes the difference between like, you know, everything of this height is going to lose to things of this height.
mm,
Um, I think it makes it so that even with the Metal Fight standard, although it's definitely more stamina oriented and in many ways kind of similar to Burst Standard, you do still have that height matchup that makes things kind of interesting from a mind game perspective. So I'd say that's definitely one of the big selling points. I think um, their parts are surprisingly easy to get a hold of. It's pretty easy to get into Metal Fight Limited as long as you kind of have the right outlets for buying lots. You could probably buy one lot off of like Yahoo Auctions Japan or Mercari JP,
yeah,
and have the parts that you need to potentially place in a Metal Fight Limited tournament for like $50.
yeah,
It definitely has an easier gateway, and then people get into Metal Fight Limited. They really enjoy it, and then they explore Metal Fight Standard and Metal Fight Zero G. And I think Zero G definitely it's very chaotic. I think it has kind of the chaos of Burst,
hmm
but it's the
Also,
battles are fast and you still have the metal. So I think there's little bits of something for everyone, but there's definitely a little bit more diversity in terms of the different types of gameplay you've got your very stamina oriented, very heavyweight Metal Fight Standard. You've got your fast paced, pretty much all attack and anti attack Metal Fight Limited. You've got the swirling sway attack chaos of Zero G, which feels very dual spin meta to me because if you do use sway attack, it needs to be the same direction as your opponent. And it's very unpredictable. And then you have kind of the more balanced 4D format. So definitely, each kind of system has its own identity, so to speak.
I've played in a couple of small like Metal Fight tournaments, and I would say like I definitely enjoy Metal Fight. Like don't like just because I don't host or anything. The only main reason why I'd have to say I don't play it as much is probably just because I like when we have bigger tournaments, and unfortunately, most of the Metal
Right.
Fight and Burst Classic tournaments are just very small. Like that's why like you guys will be able to host both in the same day. But if you have a Burst Standard, you're not going to be able to host one of the others in the same day.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
I also like the stadium design is another thing that I really like about it. It does feel like I think attack feels a lot more rewarding to players in Metal Fight Limited than it does sometimes in some of the other burst formats. And it feels a little bit more skill based because there's less recoil. Um, it's more difficult to self KO in a lot of cases. I mean, these days, most stadium ridges are pretty worn for BB10, so it might be a little bit of a different story, but all things equal.
one of my big reasons with Metal Fighting, this is my self paranoia with buying the lots, and it's a question for you. I'm so worried about fakes because I do not want to go to a Metal Fight tournament and I have fake Beyblades. I feel like it's not even just me, but like like looking back on the store, maybe that's selfish of me and being like, nah, that dude plays with fake Beyblades, he sells fake Beyblades. But with Metal Fight, can you tell, like, it's tough for me to be able to tell what the fakes are unless I know I have a legitimate one and have something that looks completely crazy right beside it. How can you tell, like, if it's legitimate or not?
Yeah, so I think mid fakes are an interesting conversation, and the community is so split on it. I really hope there's no reason to ban them. I hope we never do, because at the end of the day, I think the jury is still out on whether they are actual fakes or potentially or molds from a factory in like Hong Kong further on down the road.
Yeah.
We don't really have like a definitive answer on where they come from and what they are in some cases. And I will say there are different variants of mid fakes. I think there are some that are very clearly fakes, and then there are some cases, and I can speak from a collector standpoint as well because I have a pretty built out collection of rare Metal Fight Beyblades. That's taken
Mm-hmm.
an incredible amount of time and dedication. But even with some of those, we still don't. We can look at, and I've had a back and forth with a few people about like specifically. I'll say the Gold Soul Blaze. Some will tell you that there are no mid fake versions of Gold Soul Blaze. Others will say, "Oh, there is." But then I've been going back and forth with someone who says that there is, and it's the P the face bolt with a P inside because usually in some cases P the P face bolt is an indication that something is a mid fake. However, we have yet to find a gold soul blaze that doesn't have a P inside of it. And
Yeah.
so it's like who's to say? And if there's no other indication, because then we'll look at like the back of the metal wheel and we'll say, oh, well, there are these markings, but then we find something that we know is genuine with those markings. So I'd say if it's really hard to tell, even those of us who are very experienced when it comes to the Beyblades themselves, outside of the boxes, which based off of the serial code on the boxes, you can determine if it was within the range of when those Beyblades would have been produced or if it was a later production. That's the only way to tell
Yeah.
definitively.
When I
And that is to say, sorry, just one
No, you're
one
good.
note
You're
is like that if it is a later production, like why do we assume that inherently means that it's fake? It could have been legally produced, just not by a Japanese. It could have been produced by a factory that produced this Metal Fight at a later point, post kind of the the mainline production of those things. We don't know. I mean, also the other thing is the belief is that they use the molds that the original ones used. So if they use the same molds and the only difference is a 1 gram difference in weight, who's to say that you can't use that, or that it's a fake, with air quotes, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I the way that I took it, just from my research on them, and just, being a collector of various things, there's reprints. So you'll have the
Mhm.
originals that came out in the original year, and even if you take baseball cards, something like that, and you have the original Mickey Mantle baseball card, and then you have a reprint that comes out in the 90s or whatever. Like, it's not the original
Yeah,
one, still it's made by Topps or Ultra Deck or something like that. And that's how I saw them, because when I looked at the code, I associated
exactly.
it's the last 2 numbers that are the year of production, I believe.
Hmm.
And it was a little bit later. It was like 2 years after Metal Fight had ended or something like that. The code everyone talks about, but it's like it could have been just a reprint. And you are right, because even with Burst, so the way that'll work, they'll make a production, like the initial production, um, and it'll be so worldwide, but it's an order put in from Takara Tomy. Um, and where and like the initial productions, they tend to sell out really fast. And then Manning Limited, the sister company, is in Hong Kong.
Yeah,
Hong Kong, China is way bigger than Japan is, and they kind of distribute more so around the world. So they'll make reproductions specifically for Hong Kong, and that gets sold all over the world. And there is a code on those Beyblades. Now, they're not fake, but in Japan, like, if you have the Beyblade app, you are able to scan, like, I think your box or something like that, and get points. But for
yeah.
the reproductive ones that get made in Hong Kong, I can't remember the code. I'll
Right. And even the ones in like, if you buy like a Sonokong one, like I remember trying to scan those QR codes. It doesn't work with the Japanese app. I would say that that's a very, very similar. It's
Mhm.
essentially equivalent to kind of what
Yeah,
I would think of as like this whole. I basically, I'd say, like, if you can tell that it's fake, then it's fake. If
yeah,
you can't tell if it's fake without weighing it, I wouldn't stress over it, and it's something that you can use competitively. And when I sell things, because we don't always know, I try to give as much information as I can. I'll take a photo of the facebolt if you want. If you want to know the weight, I will weigh it and tell you. But at the end of the day, once you have that information, I think it really only matters if you're buying rare Beyblades for the purpose of display or resell,
yeah, yeah.
not so much competitively.
And I wanted to make a correction when I said they're not made in Hong Kong. They're still made in Vietnam, but Manning Limited
Mm.
out of Hong Kong is requesting the production of them to sell more. Um, but yeah, it is the same concept. It's the same thing. All right. Thank you for
Oh,
clarifying that. Now, this
one
is a
thing,
big top. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
yeah, one thing I want to talk about real quick with the mid fakes. TSO, I completely agree with you. I think people should just always be allowed to use mid fakes. I think there's not a big deal for people using them, but um, a, one of the tournaments I did go to, um, I'm not gonna make any names or anything, but it was kind of annoying that one of the players, or one of the judges, I should say, when he would inspect the combos for the match, he openly goes, "Okay, this it's a mid fake, and this it's a mid fake." Like he's just announcing that they're mid fake, and you just kind of see the face on the other person, like, is this bad?
Yeah.
Is it
Oh, I
good?
that's
Am I doing
I'm
something
very
wrong?
I'm very opposed to that.
Yeah,
I don't think it. First of all, because I think there's a lot of panic when you hear mid fake. I mean, who came up with mid fake? Like, I
yeah,
hate that name because it. I think there's a lot of panic when you hear fake, and you're like, oh my god, this person's using a fake part. Also, there are very few parts where you can actually tell if something's a mid fake. The only way you could really tell, I mean, if it's like, not egregiously, or an egregiously terrible mold, because like like I said, I've gotten different variations, but oftentimes it's the only way that you can really tell is with specific face bolt designs. And of course, if the Beyblade is put together, you can't see the internal, the coat on the inside. or sometimes with like a rubber tip, the way that the rubber tip looks, but like no one can look at a metal wheel and tell you that it's a mid fake. If that were the case, they wouldn't be allowed.
Yeah.
So I would definitely frown down on that. And I will say, like, it's a very divisive topic. I mean, especially among rare Beyblade collectors. So I'm sure someone else would tell you a completely different thing about mid fakes, but that's just my take.
I um I just want to say one more thing that we can hop off of this. When it comes to judges doing that, I even in the burst series, I talk to my judges beforehand and I let them know, because it's quite embarrassing when someone yells out loud that you have a fake Beyblade and things like that.
Right.
Especially you come into your first tournament or whatever, and I mean, not only does it make the kid feel bad or the adult, and then their parents are like, "Oh my god," because I'm sure they're not doing it on purpose. I mean, I've been a victim of it. I mean, that's why we created, one of the reasons why we created the store. If you get something on Amazon, your kid likes Beyblade, or your grandparents, um my kids, their granddad got them some Beyblades, and I knew they were fake, but they like Beyblades, and my kids still wanted to play with them. And you go to your tournament and you don't know, and then you yell that out and it embarrasses them. It's just unnecessary. So I'm like, hey, if they have a fake part, just call me over to the side. I can look at it, speak with them or speak to their parents, and I can let them borrow something like that. Like, there's no reason to shout it out and embarrass someone, because it's not their fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not their
Yeah,
fault.
I love that attitude. It's really never malicious. I mean, especially when it's the kids and the parents that are buying it, and they're
Yeah.
usually very receptive. I think, unfortunately, fakes are so prevalent with birth, and I think sometimes parents just feel a little discouraged because if they buy things at the store, they're not going to be competitive for birth standard, and if they buy them online, they don't know what the outlets are. And I think you're doing a great service by having your shop up. I think we've got a bunch of really great members of the community that have opened shops and made it a
Mm.
lot easier to get genuine parts. But I'd say a couple years ago it was really at its worst, and it definitely created kind of like an unfortunate, sometimes divisive air in the community when people feel like, okay, well, if this is fake, like I don't know where I can go to get reliable real parts where I'm not paying incredibly high prices.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Um, to the next subject, and it's a heavy one. I listen to your show a lot. I do when I'm cutting my grass. Like, that's my go-to. Old your episodes. I don't think you're just.
Oh,
Yeah, I do. When I'm cutting my grass, I listen to it, and a lot of the topics y'all discuss are things that come up here. Like, I'll hear something, I'll be like, man, me and Mike, we were just talking about that, not in the same fashion, but how classic came
hmm
about. We're talking about the meta being either boring or repetitive and things like that, and a lot of the um just the things you've seen within the community. And even, I can't remember what episode it was, but we were talking about just like the friendships that you make, and the bonds, and how some people, they come and go, and it's kind of sad. And a big thing was how the WBOs used to be, with sharing so many combos and sharing a lot of testing. So that just I just wanted to know, through your experience from your time when you started all the way through now, what are some of the changes, for good or bad, that you've seen within the community, and growth as well?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I would love to bring that podcast back at some point. I think one of my favorite episodes was the one where we got a few different players from various Southeast Asian countries talking
Yeah.
about their experience in tournaments. That was great. I really enjoyed that. So yeah, I'd say well, let's start with some of the positives because always like to look on the bright side. I
Yeah.
think with a lot of the first of all, it's a much larger community.
Mhm.
It's a lot more age diverse. I think with Metal Fight and early Burst, which was many of the same people that were in the late Metal Fight years, you do have this kind of interesting split where it's a lot of very young kids, and then you also have a few older players that are very serious, and there's kind of no real in between.
Mhm.
So that's definitely one characteristic that I think has changed for the better. I do feel like a lot closer, I think, to a lot of the younger players. I feel like there's a much closer community as far as like getting to know other players by name, being a larger community. I feel like there are a lot more older players that show up, a lot more younger players. There's a little something for everyone. Um, Sorry, my my dogs came in, so I got a little
Oh, you're good.
distracted there for a sec. Um, but yeah, I think that's definitely a positive. I think uh, the kids being a lot more online and having like Discord and chat ups definitely helps too. I feel like especially like some of the high schoolers, middle schoolers, like they've developed much closer relationships than I think a lot of the players during Metal Fight did when they were at that same age. Part of the reason just being that I think kids are a lot more online now, and back then, really the primary mode of communication, if you were a member on the WBO and talking to other people your age, was through the forums and through forum posts. So they're able to develop much more genuine friendships with people their age and develop friendships outside of the hobby. And I think that's really cool. So those are all big positives. I think that the community as a whole has definitely grown. Although it's kind of interesting, I think the number of regions, although it's remained the same, I'd say in the US. Over time there have been regions that have come and gone. Like the New York scene isn't quite what it used to be. Um, there are some other regions that have popped up and then disappeared. It's definitely gotten a lot less international.
Hmm.
Um, we used to have tournaments in like Puerto Rico. There was a huge Indian community. Tournaments in Europe, especially in like Italy. The UK was one of the most active regions. Tournaments in Australia. There were sometimes tournaments in some places in Asia, but that was a little bit less common just due to the language barrier.
Yeah.
Uh, but but yeah, it's definitely gotten a little bit less international. The WBO has gotten less world
Yeah.
um, in a
Singapore is up
way.
there heavy. I actually
Yeah,
follow
that's been
that.
that's been very cool to see. That's been
Yeah.
awesome. Scott has always had a close connection to a lot of the Japanese Beyblade players, and I want to say back in 2016 or 2017, we did make a huge push to get the Japanese community on the WBO. There was a Japanese forum. There were a series of like Wari Bay X WBO tournaments, and it
Mm.
just didn't really stick because I think again the language barrier is huge, and also just the fact that they have such an established community where there are tournaments almost every week. There's no real need for the WBO, I think.
Yeah.
So some other differences, I think. One that is an eternal source of frustration for me is really feeling like all the important conversations are, and this has gotten a little bit better, I will say, because I think me and some other older players have really pushed back on the fact that a lot of the most important conversations are happening over Discord, and so there has been a push to put things on the forums. But there's definitely been a period of time up until very recently where decisions were being made based off of very drawn out conversations on the Discord, but on the Discord nonetheless. For a
Yeah.
lot of people, there are both 13, 14-year-olds that I know in our community that aren't allowed to use Discord, that wouldn't be privy to those conversations, wouldn't be able to contribute.
Mhm.
And then there are people like me, and I'm sure you guys who have full-time jobs. Like, yeah, I'm working a 9 to 5. I have other things that I need to take care of outside, and I'm sure you, especially with your family and everything. It's You don't really have time to both be there when those conversations are happening and to be present. Um, and by the time you can get around to addressing it, if you do see them, and if it's not buried in thousands and thousands of other posts, it's the conversation is already gone, and the likelihood that you're going to be able to track down all those same people to start the same conversation up again is
Tough.
a little lower.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating. I mean, the only time I really am able to contribute is if someone tags me in something. Of
Mm.
course, when it comes to forum posts, I always try to contribute when I can, and if it's something that I care about. And that's one of the things that I value about the forums, and why I truly hope that we never transition into like a just Discord or a just live chat organization, because both for posterity, so that we can go back and reference things, and also because it democratizes those kinds of conversations. There's one place that someone can go to view them, to see all the posts, everything that was said over years and years. You can vote. It's just there are a lot of things about it that I think are pros when you have a competitive organization, and one that's grassroots, which I like to remind people is not the case with a lot of these hobbies that people are comparing the WBO to. We are not a private for-profit company, so we don't have developers to build out all of the competitive functionality that I think a lot of people want to see. And we're
Yeah.
also not an arm of a private company that's running competitive tournaments,
Mhm.
wherein, essentially we make the decisions. We look at what people are saying, and make the decisions purely based off of what we think is best for the community. It's a combination of both being involved in the community and also kind of being able to sift out what's being said by and large with kind of the most meaningful things. So I'd say that's definitely a huge one. I think there have always been people who have liked to contribute without necessarily providing tests or tournament experience anecdotes. But there's a lot more of that now, I think, because it's easier.
Mhm.
Back in, I think this is kind of a sign of the times in general, where I think fandom, and there was an interesting article I read recently about of how fandoms have become less gatekeepy. Everything's everything. There's less gatekeeping by and large, and I think that's a great thing for a lot of reasons. And at the same time, um, it does mean that when it comes to making decisions, it can be kind of hard to sift through what 10 people are saying who haven't attended a tournament or who haven't posted tests, with what two people who attend tournaments and share their tests are saying, and it's like,
Yeah.
we can't always weigh all of those voices equally. Back in, and just to kind of return to my initial point, back a few years ago, well, I guess it wasn't a few years ago, many years ago,
Yeah.
with Metal Fight, uh, with there being a thread for every competitive combination that was created, there would be nothing to fill that thread and those posts if there weren't tests. People would create threads with the tests. People would reply to those threads asking if they can test something else.
Mm.
And there were one or two situations where players faked test results, and would be banned because faking test results, and in one specific case, this is a person who made like dozens of threads who actually got certain parts banned based off of their tests, and it turned out their tests were faked.
Oh man,
But
that's
yeah, but that was just an edge case. I mean, that I think that just goes to show um, how heavily those tests were weighed when it came to public discourse. And without those tests, I think, of course, like I said before, tests aren't quite as valuable because of the mold variation, and because things are a little bit less clear cut with matchups. Now, I love that I'm kind of connecting all of these things, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But although that is the case, it is still a data point that is missing when it comes to making decisions
yeah.
for the community.
I would because I remember I can't remember the years y'all were doing your show, but I do remember you talking about the transition to Discord. Because I'm older, a little bit older too. I'm 34, so I remember with the transition, even outside of just Beyblade, from talking to your friends to getting social media and like Discord. I have Discord. This is really all that I really use it for. I'm not up there, and yes, I had Mike has hit me up sometimes and been like, "Hey, they're having a conversation concerning whatever topic, a ruling or a thought or this and that." And by the time that I'm able to get in there, it's long gone, and I'm scrolling
Right.
up trying to find the first one, and I scroll too far, and then I'm just like, okay, I can't. So I definitely do get that and understand that aspect because times have changed and the WBO is changing. And one of the things, what a big reason I want to have you up here for that knowledge and like I said, the history lesson, because I want to get a better understanding um, of the history of the WBO. Because sometimes my own assumptions and I'm guilty of it, and I'm like getting on a little bit of tangent, y'all. Y'all know I do this, but of how things used to be ran and how things are now as far as our gameplay. Because I got into the WBO in 2020, probably just a few months in at towards the end of 2019, and when I got in, I just saw it as something competitive that got me into Beyblade. Found out about the fake parts, ended up creating a store to try to help out the community and things like that, and then getting heavily involved in the competitive scene because I really like it and I enjoy it. And some of the issues I ran into and I didn't understand was some of the way things were ran because when I was younger, I wasn't part of forum groups or anything like that. But
Mm-hmm.
through time, I've come to understand a few things on how you all or how the WBO as a whole like makes this decision, how the culture has changed, whether for good or for bad. And I actually listened to thank you, Mike. I went back and I listened to the Zankcast with Kay
Yeah.
and how he talked about um the growth of not necessarily the growth of the WBO, but just what the WBO was about. And when he was
Yeah.
speaking on that and talking about like catering to the community, like you were saying and mentioning, like with the testing and having all these ideas and thoughts, because I sometimes I used to feel like I would post things or things would get posted and it was never looked at or thought about. And I don't post a lot of my testing. I don't want to say too lazy for that, but I know I am. But when it comes to hosting the tournaments and hosting events, that's a lot of where my feedback comes from, is just from that. Um, so it was good when I listened to him and then listened to you to see that that actually like does get looked at, even though we don't initially feel it. And to
Right.
um, I guess the growing pains, even from when you talked about like all the things y'all had to go through, and the things you had to go through with like making challenge and doing things like that, and getting to the point we are now, and how a lot of these decisions were for the overall community. Like it wasn't just for um, a specific group or anything like that. Like I can't remember what he said when he talked about the back wall rule. Because I know I just put that post up and you responded to it, and it always like blew my mind on how it came about and things like that. And he said he tried to, or you all tried to develop that for the so it can work in a universal way. So no matter what stadium, at the time you are using your combos and things like that, that it could try to be fair. And with that mindset, I could see how things were getting done and how gameplay was being implemented, because it wasn't the WBO was not what it is now, and it's just changing with the time. So I'm probably just rambling on, but it makes sense, and I do appreciate that. Appreciate what you're.
Yeah, and no, I think one thing that I always like to stress that I think a lot of people don't realize, and it could have changed in the past year or so, but I was on the organized play staff for quite a while, and when I was kind of like the the manager, so to speak, because that was the structure of the staff. Every month we would meet, and even if a lot of times I wouldn't necessarily post about a thread or about a topic, but I would always bring those conversations, especially the ones that got a lot of attention, to the forefront. So I will say that anytime a proposal is put up, whether it's on the forum or in the Discord, and there's a lot of discourse about it, and there's a lot of serious thought that goes into it. Those are and always will be discussed by the staff and will be voted on as early as possible by the staff, even if no one is necessarily commenting to say, hey, we're voting on this, or oh, we're talking about this. Yeah, so I think it's hard to always filter down all of that information about what gets talked about, but that's definitely important. And I think one other thing, and I'm sure Geetster has mentioned this before when he's talked about the history of the WBO, but I think you mentioned not posting tests because, let's face it, we're all not very motivated when it, and I think part of that is because if you post a testing thread today, you are not going to get the same reception that you did 10 years ago. I know Broyito put a lot of time and energy into a really well thought out competitive testing thread for something in plastics, and joking was like, I can't wait to get like one or two replies, and yeah, that was actually the case because both there aren't that many people in the community who can speak to it, but also just people aren't checking that with the same regularity. But I think part of the reason for that is because there aren't the same incentives in place to encourage that kind of conversation. So, for example, back in the olden days, we had what was called advanced members, and their usernames. And this is back when forums were cool, and having your name in a different color or a badge next to your name made a really big difference. And so your name would be italicized, and that was how the community kind of identified some of those key players and competitive voices. And the way that you gained that recognition was by making a lot of very thought out posts and threads about topics that were competitive in nature. And then once you became one of those members, you gained access to a forum that everyone else could see, but only those competitive members could post. So again, there's definitely an inherent element of gatekeeping there, but it was also, frankly, the reason why a lot of us, and I say us because most of the competitive community was me and people my age who were in high school, who had a little bit of time. We were very motivated by that. And then once you were an advanced member, you want to maintain that. You want people to know that they can come to you to get competitive advice, to know that your threads are going to be quality, to kind of maintain that presence. So you had that. And then I think in 2016, when the WBO underwent its rebranding and Burst came out, that was done away with, and advanced members became mentors, and it was I think like a friendlier branding, but it didn't quite have the same appeal. And then at that point, a combination of both that going away with, so no longer having that kind of status, and also the fact that people were posting less on forums in general contributed to the complete deterioration of competitive conversations on the forum.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you way before we started talking about it, but I was gonna ask you how you felt about like things going more towards Discord than the forums, because I'm from an older era and time where during being on the internet, forums were a big thing while I was in high school and stuff.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Sam. I mean, you and I both, right?
yeah, so like you'll see me make a whole proposal thread, and it's like a mile long of a page with then like with Google Docs and stuff of me stuff that I've just completely used a whole afternoon of my time typing up to make as thorough as I can.
Yes, and I
then
think the advantage of that is that you can't just make 20 different post 20 different messages. Say, oh, I think this. Someone says, oh, tested. Oh, okay, I tested it. It's actually not that good. There's less noise because you are forced to sit down and make this thread, and it better be a really good thread because sometimes that's the first and only post that people are going to see when they click on it. So you're both forced to sit down and think about it, but also on the flip side, I can go back and look at that or at long posts, stories I wrote on other forums, and I can look back at it with pride because it's this very tangible evidence of something that I feel like I accomplished or that I put a lot of effort into that I'm proud of. So I feel like there's an advantage to both the poster and the people who are getting into the community. I mean, all of us are older, so maybe it's just old man yells at cloud here. But I would go so far as to say, like, it it feels less democratic in some ways to relegate those conversations to Discord, because a lot of people, like I said, don't have access or don't have the time and are limited by how much they can read. And then there's so much information that gets lost. And it's
Yeah.
incredibly it's by when
Uh,
it's ironic because a lot of those gatekeeping measures that I talk about in the early days actually led to a less gatekeeping experience when it came to getting into competitive in the hobby. I
yeah.
was able to read on the WBO, read everything I needed to know on the WBO. Never needed to, form these strong bonds where someone will share top secret information that wasn't in their winning combos. I didn't need to do any of that. I just needed to dedicate time to reading up, consuming all of this knowledge, and I could go into my first tournament and place. And I don't. It's. I can't imagine how difficult it would be to do that today
Yeah.
because those resources aren't as accessible as they used to be.
Yeah, that's just like, thinking about the forums and everything like that. One of the things too is that I like about the forums is I feel like there's a good amount of people that when I put something up on the forum, I feel like I'm talking back to an adult sometimes. I mean, sometimes I don't,
Right.
but if something is said on Discord, you get like 30 people basically telling you you're wrong, and I'm just like, these
Yeah,
responses sound like you're a 5-year-old.
yeah,
And if you posted something like that on the forums, you would get reported or
Right.
your post would be deleted. If you said something like stay mad or LOL, no, I don't like as your entire post on the forums, that's deleted because it's not constructive on on in the Discord. It's impossible to regulate messages
Right.
with that same level of stringency.
Discord is it's a lot more fast paced. Like I know when I'm on the forum, like you said, I do take my time if I put up a proposal, or even take my time when I put a response. And sometimes I'll write a response and then I'll look back and I'll read and make sure it makes sense. But it's easy to just put like LOL, okay, or
Hmm.
just start
Yeah.
arguing within
Yeah.
Discord. I
Yeah, because
wanted to,
like,
oh,
go ahead.
yeah, because even, and this was something else that came up that helped me, I would say a benefit to the forum. And I did a lot last night, Mike, from just things that you mentioned. I did end up reading that whole proposal from Think, and that, like, it does make a lot of sense. And even if some things like agree or disagree, and then it made me realize some things that I didn't realize before on the overall just to the community. And we talked back and forth, and you could see the full length of the conversation. And it does take time, to have an educated response versus when you go into Discord and it's just like bam, 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 or even you're getting ganged up on.
Yep.
You thing, and then you have
Yeah.
50 people
That's
just
a huge one.
yeah, and
I've
it's wow,
I mean I talked to a lot of these kids and several of them have had to take a break from the Discord. I think if I were as active as they were, I'm sure I would have taken plenty of breaks, but
I
um I know
I
several of them have taken a step back and said this is bad for my mental health, and I applaud anyone who can do that. But
yeah,
you shouldn't get to a point where the community that you talk with about something that you love impacts your mental health in a negative way.
Yeah, I almost never respond or post anything in the Discord unless like I feel like what I need to say is very necessary.
mm,
Right.
And even then cuz there was the whole think proposal came from I was just watching as there was just nothing but arguing going down the Discord one day of just them arguing between banning BDR or not banning BDR. And so then I just put my 2 cents in, and then people are like, "Wait a minute, this is a good idea."
yeah,
And it's just like it's just annoying because it's like, you know, you guys are just arguing back and forth in a Discord chat, and then like I can't sit there and actually take the time to read it and catch up in time before like I'm gonna go eat dinner or something. Like you just can't because it's just still constantly going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some things that have helped me, and like I said, because I have been more quiet. I don't ever really talk in the Discord, and then on the forum, because I took a break for a while because I felt myself getting just frustrated, just to be honest. But as I've like as you see more things, and it's kind of like what TSO said, like the person that put up the post, and they never did any testing, and they lied about it, ended up getting parts banned, and it was just complete chaos. A lot of these kids, adults, or whoever, I'm sure, that even in Discord and still some on the forum, like they don't play or they're not involved, and they just want to argue. Like even the proposal that Think just put up, there was, I think there may be more now, but there were two. Like, I'm not saying that you can't dislike it, but literally that proposal was like, hey, let's keep everything the same way that it is. And you people, some of the people who want to be that have the bans, we can do that, and then we can also just add this extra thing. And people were like, no, I don't want that. And it's literally what the proposal is like,
Right.
this is how the WBO is now. Let's keep that. And then let's add an element of the WBBA. And they were like, no, no, no. It's like, it's
Yeah,
not,
I
it's
don't
the
understand if
thing.
people just don't understand it because it's purely additive.
Yeah.
There's there are no I the only negative implication I could see is that if you prefer significantly prefer the WBO rules and don't want to play WBBA, it could result in fewer tournaments in your area using the WBO rules because, just like how if you prefer 1v1, now you're competing with pick three, choose one, and 3v3.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I think there are certainly more pros than cons. So I think
That's
that's a great example.
that's 100% how I saw it. And one thing, because even last night, and I did mention it to Think, and I told him, the one flaw that I saw is that you can have the rotational change, but it would still be allowed in single bay and pick three, choose one. And I've always felt like, man, that might be too OP. But he had a response that made me like remember why everything is okay and will be okay. He was like, look, if you don't, is like it is a option for people to do. If they want to play pick three, choose one with rotational changes, and they run into a lot of issues, then that's fine. Because they have the option to play 3v3, or they have the option to do they had the option to play the unlimited format with WBBA. They have other options, and I think that's one of the things that kind of opened my eyes, because yesterday we were talking and discussing a lot of things. But the beauty of the WBO, and it's like what you said, with the community, we have a lot of options. Because I fought for 3v3 before, when it was just single bay, and that option was there. I have no reason to complain about 1v1 anymore because I don't have to play it. And even if, like, let's say only in my area, maybe they're only doing single bay. Well, I also have the option to become an organizer and to host my own tournaments. So
Exactly.
yeah, the options are still there. So even if someone complained like, oh, all they're doing is WBBA right now, well, you still have the option to become an organizer and to do your thing. And as long as that's there, it doesn't matter if there's some rules that I agree with or disagree with, or some like formats I agree or disagree with. I have the option to cater to my community and still do what I enjoy and have fun in that way. And that's a positive light to look at it, but I think everyone doesn't see it that way. So it is what it is. And after I read that and got that understanding, I was like, hey, I'm good.
I think I think there's a big fear in a lot of people that if we start allowing WBBA, more people will start hosting nothing but WBBA, so then the WBO will kind of be forgotten. Like, because at that point in time, there were just basically WBBA, just not ran by Takara Tomy. I don't believe that's correct. I mean,
I don't think so either. Yeah.
I think at the
Hmm.
very start, yes, you'll see an increase in WBBA tournaments because let's be real, it's new. Like we don't really play that here, so it's new for people. They're gonna want to play it. They're gonna want to try it. but you have to give things time to, after you see the spike, to kind of trickle down and flatline.
Yeah.
Just kind of be where it needs to be.
And
Right.
also, like, because we say that, and as this is my personal experience, I was an advocate for 3v3. Like, that's all I wanted to play. Um, always. I didn't want to play pick three, choose one. I didn't want to do single bay or none of that. But as I'm hosting more and I see my community and I see, like, for me to be able to get through tournaments and still play them, I do play pick three, choose one now. Um, I've even considered doing single bay now, even though I didn't want to before, but having those options because it helps me to get through things a little bit quicker. So yeah, I think even initially, if people wanted to just do WBBA, they might. And it starts off, but it's going to ultimately factor down to what your community wants. And sometimes, a lot of times, because I'm like this as well, like, you think something is going to be bad and it's like, oh, that's not going to work. Like, it's going to suck. Everything is going to go downhill. And you try it and it's fine. You had anxiety and worried about nothing. And that happens a lot. It's just human beings. And the other thing with us, we're scared of change. Any
Yeah,
type.
I heard recently we are biologically wired to be resistant to change. I think
Mhm.
knowing that makes you more conscious of that bias because I think, frankly, I saw the proposal and I was like, at first I was like, oh man, like I don't want things to change. And then
Yeah.
it's like getting over that initial hurdle and being open to new
Yeah.
ideas.
Yeah. I
It gets
think,
harder as you get older, for sure.
yeah, yeah. Because you get stuck in your ways, and you're like, it's been like
Right.
this for so long. I don't want anything different. But I mean, that's life. I mean, it's like that with our economy, with politics, with work. It is what it is. Um, yeah. So, I know we'll wrap it up here soon. Did you have any questions for us, TSO, or anything like for that you want to see from the WBO or progression, or any shout outs to the community or anything like that?
Oh man. I mean, I it's cool to be able to get an opportunity to talk to two players who got into the hobby in the last few years. And I mean, I don't have any questions off the top of my head, but I'd love to hear kind of what your thoughts are. Hearing what the community used to be like and what it is now. And I'd just love to hear your open thoughts and reactions, I guess.
Um, Solid. You want to go first, Mike, or you care if
It,
I?
it it don't matter to me. If you want to go first, go first.
Yeah. So it was good for me to hear, honestly, because we had our show last night and we talked and I had my opinions, and then I watched Zankcast, um, read through the forum some things, and then the conversation with you, like the things from the past and how they developed. Some things were different than what I thought. Um, but it was great to hear about the growing pains and about the testing, um, because I initially, like, I felt like it was just a small group, just played how you wanted to play, and now it's gotten bigger and not wanting to accept the change. But when I sit back and I look at it, I'm like, there are a lot of changes that have been made, like the implementation of the formats, the freedom of the organizers to be able to I think that overall helps to overall grow the community, because we aren't as limited as sometimes, like, is what I think. Um, and I like the growth. I do hop up on the forum and I'll just read whatever I can, whether it's relevant to today's time or not, just to see different thoughts and opinions. Um, I like. I will say I do enjoy what a WBO is at right now. I wasn't there in the past, but I like where it's at right now because we can actively see, even though it may not feel like it sometimes, the changes that have been made. Like, even Mike and I, for the close to 4 years that we played or been
Yeah.
involved, been a lot of changes, and they're changes for the better, and it is
Yeah,
growth.
I think people come in and they're like the first few months they have this, maybe even the first year they're like, oh man, nothing, okay, there are all these proposals and nothing ever gets through. um I think it's great that you mentioned that because I think as time goes on you look back and you realize, wow, actually a lot has happened. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the staff is limited by the number of people who want to commit uh, a lot of hours to something that's entirely volunteer. And then there's also just the challenge of like we want everyone's voice to be heard, and sometimes it can make it really hard to get things pushed through because we want to give everyone equal weight. And so if there's a disagreement, it can be really hard to push past that. So I think that's one challenge, but I think we made a lot of progress in the past few years, and I appreciate the steps that the current staff and everyone here has made to try to push things onto the forum, to try to really take the time to think through the thoughts and proposals that we have. I mean, the two of you have really put out some great proposals that I think help the community overall. And it's those kinds of contributions that allow us to advance changes, because we need threads when we're making decisions. We need threads like those that are well thought out, that have all of the arguments in order to make that decision.
100%.
Yeah, sorry to butt in. I
No,
had
no,
to respond
good.
to that.
Like that's
Bryce, definitely want to hear your take as well.
One of the things that I definitely want to say is I'm kind of upset that I did not get to experience the WBO the way you did. I would love to have more forums, like active forum discussions and testing forums, because it really does just kind of feel like you can kind of just play by yourself at home and keep combos and stuff to yourself and not like really share them. And I don't know, it's just like you only get one side of testing when you're testing by yourself, and I feel like having other people contribute and working together is what it means to play Beyblade together.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we used to have competitive combo threads that were up to date for every forum, and those combos were made with the help of multiple people. For example, in Metal Fight Standard, one combo that I put up a thread for, that I like to say I kind of because I made the thread, like I kind of contributed that to the list, was Gemble 90 WD or some variation of that. Could be EWD, could be 100.
Mhm.
But that combo was created with the help of other people who posted in that thread and said, "Hey, why don't you try it with this driver performance tip or at this height?" One initial thing that oversight that I had with that thread was that I only had one EWD and it wasn't a great mold. And there are very few parts in Metal Fight where a mold makes a big difference, but that's one of them because it does have a loose piece. And seeing someone else able to test it and get completely different results really helped contribute to the overall development of that combo. It really was like a development of competitive combos. So it's like things like that that are really awesome, and again would love to see that someday come back.
Yeah, I would love to see more of that. I would also love to see like less of a community divide. Like it seems like the community was
Mm-hmm.
more together back then than it is now.
I
Um,
think I think that might be due to the amount of people. I would say that. Um, not to just throw my opinion in there, but when you have like the small, like you look at like the Maryland community, or I just look at my NC community, and we're good. But just
Yeah.
but when you bring everyone together, there's more opinions,
yeah,
more base
Yeah,
and
and I also don't want to like wax poetic on like how great the community was back then, because I think there have always been a lot of feuds and internal fighting. There were always certain regions that were skeptical of other regions. I would actually say that a lot of the rules that are in place now are because of um, certain unfair, some might say dirty tactics that certain people or certain areas used in the past.
yeah,
So I think there definitely was an element of that. Uh,
yeah,
I think I think just kind of bringing it back to what um, God, I forget for gaming. Forget your name. What you
James.
said,
James.
James.
Yeah,
Like stay
it's
cool
all
for
good.
you. What James said
Yeah,
about how just everything's become more polarized. I feel like the quick responses that you get with chat messages, it kind of feeds in that quick reaction and that immediate response
Yeah.
versus, taking the time to think through something to kind of cool down, clear your head. I mean, sometimes even when you're writing a forum post, in the process of that, you're like, oh man, maybe I need to scale it back a little bit.
Yeah.
I think part of it's the medium. I would actually say that in the past couple of years, I was thinking about this today. I feel like the parents are a lot more tolerable now than they were a few years ago. I don't know if it's maybe because I see fewer fakes at tournaments. I don't know if it's because I think part of it could be because there are a lot more older players, and in the past there was an almost antagonistic atmosphere, I think, sometimes between uh, when you had a region with like a few older players like myself, and I was hosting tournaments and I was winning those tournaments, and it made me feel like guilty, and I
uh-huh.
think some parents wanted to make me feel guilty for that. But I think because there are a lot, the community has gathered a lot more older players. It feels like the parents are a lot friendlier, a lot more willing to chat with you, and a lot less like it feels like they aren't judging you the way that I think even a few years ago. I feel like it was really bad during the first few burst generations, I guess.
TSO, you know what it is? It's just like us. You're getting older, so the parents you're meeting now are probably just like they're just us,
Mm,
and we're
yeah.
probably more tolerant, and that's what it is. Back then, it was
I think that's part of it, man. I think you're
yeah,
right.
the older
The,
generation
the
probably,
generation. Yeah.
but now,
Yeah, it was bad. I mean,
yeah,
even when I was like 16, I remember when I was 16, we had one tournament where we like me and my friend Leo 19 hosted, and we ended up coming in first and second, and we got like kicked out of the library. We're doing finals outside, and it was like a really close match with like Dragoon and something else, and like everything with Dragoon is so tight. We had to use video, and back then video wasn't very common. And a mom like she was testing us. She was like she we I was judging, and he won, and she thought that I was giving him the win because we knew each other, and she was arguing with me and like demanding that we redid the match. And it was like it puts you in a really uncomfortable situation. I mean, even especially when you're like I was like a few years older than this kid. I was still a kid myself. So I'm just so glad I don't have to deal with that as much. Very, very rarely these
Yeah.
days.
yeah, most of the parents are like within our generation. And don't get me wrong, I still deal with some out of control dads. It's mainly the dads. Um,
Yeah,
but I think with like Mike and I and our generation, like we grew up with or we liked anime, probably get picked on when we were younger, but it's a thing now, and now we're adults, and we can, I guess, be out and about with our nerdier interests, versus some of the older
yeah,
generations that maybe didn't understand as much of the gaming, like bigger into
right.
sport like that. So the arguing was a big part of it. And not saying like the gaming community is all nice and friendly, because there's definitely some drama that goes on within it, but I think that's a big part of it. We're getting closer in the
Yeah,
age where the parents are, or we are parents ourselves, and more understanding.
That and like you said,
dads
the
like you are awesome. Like you guys are great. You are absolutely. It's so great to see this generation and how supportive parents are. And like I think about my own dad who took me to my first tournament, and he dropped me off, and he stood and watched, and he was just he like my parents still give me so much crap for it. Like
Oh,
it,
sorry.
I mean, even as a 15-year-old, they were judging the hell out of me for this. Especially because at the time I was like the oldest player who wasn't a dad. That's kind of crazy to think about. Like you have a tournament with like 22, 24 people, and there were like two dads, and then there was me, and everyone else was younger than me. I was 15.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So you guys are great. Keep doing what you're doing, and I think people see that, and it definitely helps change their perspective too. They
Appreciate
see
that.
that it can be a bonding activity with their kids.
I I will say too, like our tournaments are nothing without the people that help. Like TSO,
Yeah.
you help me out a lot too, and I appreciate it every time. With judging or
I know I feel
yeah,
bad that I haven't been doing it as much. Oh man, it's just
no,
those I feel so guilty when I have to say that someone won and it was so close, you know.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's honestly, it's okay because I'm even starting to feel it where it's like, man, I need a break from just judging and
Yeah.
organizing. Like I just want like, especially like we have the BWC coming up, and I do get to play in the Dark Horseman tournament, and part of me is just like, I would really like to be able to just have time to just like play and
Hmm.
think about that instead of having to think about like how many matches are left in this round, what stadiums are open, do I have to call another match while I'm in the middle of playing, and stuff
Absolutely.
like that. So,
Yeah.
like that's like we had Dragus, he hosted today's tournament and I let him kind of do most of everything. I just told him if he needed help to ask me or if I saw he was struggling somewhere, I tried to help. But for the most part I did get to not have to do as much, and it felt pretty good. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Yeah. It is good to have another host. And it is good to have that extra help. Shout out to Fireblader07. He makes it to all of our tournaments, and I use him as a consistent judge. Thank you everyone else that helps judge too, but he's at every one, and I really appreciate that because we couldn't get through this on our own. I have tried to like be the host and the judge. It takes too long and it's too stressful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
agreed.
but yeah,
Yeah, you said shout outs. I guess my final thought, shout out to you guys, to everyone who's trying to make this community a better place and make getting releases easier. I think that's so awesome. Massive shout out to Shindog. Crisis and I were talking about him today. Just what a great guy who's really helped hold the WBO up,
yeah.
and keep
I
it
got
keep it
stuff.
running sometimes. He's been awesome. And all the people that came before him and before all of us. Kai V, I think especially, really made the WBO what it is today, and single-handedly ran it for many years when a lot of other people had kind of fallen out and given up. And Kay Scott now, like he does a lot of work behind the scenes that I think a lot of people don't see, but he does do a lot for the community, and I think everyone that's involved has such a strong passion for this hobby and for the community and only wants what's best for it.
Yeah,
So everything comes from a place of passion.
that's definitely what's up. That's definitely what's up. I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you for shouting us out and everyone that you did shout out. I got a lot of love for Shendog. He's really helped me.
He's awesome.
He's helped me understand the WBO and the workings, and also helped me as an organizer. Helped me within the Beyblade world, and yeah, I really appreciate that guy a whole lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, Shindog does a great job. I appreciate him.
Yeah,
And thank you guys for having me on. I'm happy that I get to talk about the community, hopefully shed a little bit of light to people who've joined the community in the past couple years, and looking forward to what's next with Generation X.
solid, 100%. I'm super hype about it, and that
Uh,
reminded one more thing. What is your YouTube? Is it on your Instagram? Is there a link, or because I'll put it in
Oh
this?
man, don't worry about my YouTube, but you can find me on Instagram, WBOTSO. I'm doing my best to post a little bit more, trying to post some of the new rare releases I've gotten. I'm like really happy about them.
Put the old
So
podcast in there.
Hmm?
yeah,
Put the
I
old
should do it.
podcast link. Put that
Oh
in
yeah,
Yeah, awesome.
I am gonna put the podcast link in there. And yeah, I've seen your recent photos with the bays. I like the one in the I don't think it was a cherry blossom tree, but it was
Oh, it was an actual Actually, it's a pretty traumatic story. I was so proud of that Beyblade. I'd just gotten the red Rev Up recolor that day, and it was like raining outside, and I'm like, my dog does not like to go outside when it's 40 degrees out and raining, neither do I. But I brought her out there with me. and I'm like, I am going to put this Beyblade in a cherry blossom tree and take a photo because, it's only going to be here for like 2 more weeks.
Mhm.
And she was tugging at the leash and it fell out of the tree right after I took that photo.
Oh
Like
man.
that I have a photo, and then I have a second photo I took where it's no longer in the tree. It fell out and it rolled on the gravel and got scratched.
Oh,
And it
I'm
was woo,
sorry.
yeah. So there's a lot of emotion behind that photo. But
Oh,
yeah, one of the cool things I've been experimenting with is like being able to take like my love of like the Japanese graphic arts and the prints that I have and kind of uh, put that as like a backdrop with some Beyblade. So it's awesome.
pretty dope. Pretty dope. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm a put your Instagram down below and also share the podcast episodes. Definitely listen to them. You also get a little bit more insight to some of the history and even like some of the things that Mike and I discuss up here, like with the meta and like stamina heavy. That's nothing new. Y'all see it when you hear them talk. You hear Wombat, who has
Oh,
the deepest voice in the world. When I
he
when,
does.
when he first came on, I was like, damn, who is
You
that?
think it's fake. You think it's fake.
Yeah, he has the deepest voice in the world.
He's come back recently, and someday we might bring it back. And the title "Meta Madness" is a little bit of an Easter egg. If you're able to get where what that reference comes from, you can comment in this
Yeah.
video.
So, all right. Thank you for coming on. We definitely appreciate it. We love all the insight. Thank you all for listening. Continue to, play Beyblade together. Tongue twister. Um, grow in your local communities, become an organizer, get involved with the forums. Discord's solid. Get involved with that as well. But maybe we can all bring the testing back, or bring the hype back with the forum. But most importantly, like getting out there and playing and continuing to grow Beyblade. All right. Without further ado, appreciate it so much again, TSO. Thank you as well, Mike. And everyone, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.